few more people coming in late, so if we have them coming late, I'll just remind them to grab it. I've got lists and the rest we're supposed to split. And then what do we do also with the I know we have a big presentation over at St. Andrew, thank you so much. Dr. Gene Constantine is going to be there. Another person speaking today, which sounds like a good presentation. Okay. Bill, are we ready? All right, let's go ahead and stand and we'll ask God's blessing on our time together. Because I think we're ready to start, yes. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, our God is one. Gracious Lord, we ask you to come and be in our midst, guide us and direct us as we seek to understand the language of the church, which ultimately is love, and come to know thee as the true mystery of God, and through the many things that thou hast given to the church, enabling us to draw closer to thee. We ask this in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, be seated, please, and thank you for coming today. So I spent a lot of preparation on this class because I've had over the years people, especially because we have a number of people who converted and come into the Orthodox Church, including myself. A lot of the terminology is very different. A lot of it is very foreign. And that's because overwhelmingly the bulk of it, of course, is Greek. And that makes sense because the first language of the church at the time of Jesus Christ was Greek, even though Jesus himself was Jewish and would have spoken Aramaic, we know for sure, because of some of the words that are used, copied in the scriptures. However, the quotes when he reads from scripture, the quotes from especially the apostles in their writings is overwhelmingly from the Greek Septuagint, which was in the Greek. So it meant that the disciples and the apostles were reading the Greek Old Testament in Greek. And so, and the worship language of the church was Greek because that was the lingua franca of the time, right? That was a common language. Just like today throughout the world, as we've said before, the common language, if you're going to fly an airplane, if you're going to do international commerce, international trade, the working language is English. Because that's what most people know. And simply because of the impact of the British Empire, being one of the most widespread part of the empire, and then get one of each. Also, and Christian, each one that you see there, the stack, grab one. And then, of course, the influence of the United States has really helped to push it, English as the common language. So, but Greek was the language for the people at the time, although there's going to be some terms that we have that are Latin. Now, one of the things that we want to be careful for is that we're trying to understand what Christ has given to us by the power of the Holy Spirit. So a couple of principles. And number one, first and foremost, some people would love to have, a few people, the language of the church in some of the old archaic languages because they say, you know, the church should be mysterious. There should be mystery. Well, believe me, if you're trying to understand how who God is and who He is, how He's in relationship with us and how He works in and through us and with the world, there are things way beyond our comprehension. So ultimately, Clevis used to say to that, some of the people, I even know one of my Greek teachers, when I was learning Greek at seminary, was saying she preferred keeping the language in the archaic Greek because she liked the notion of it, the service being mysterious. And to which Father Clevis, who was our he was our liturgics and sacraments professor, would say in Greek, kakos, which means bad. and he would be saying that, no, Christ is the mystery. He's the mystery. These other things don't need to be mysterious. They can be very understandable and knowable, but because we're talking about the incarnation took place nearly almost 2,000 years ago when the common language was Greek, this terminology coming from there thus pulls from that. Of course, yes, our patriarchate in Antioch is known as the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Antioch, even though the overwhelmingly bulk of the people that are there, at least 90% would be Arabic speaking. You know, you have some that are Armenians, you have some that would be Greeks, you know, and that patriarchate as well too. A lot of people have left, unfortunately. And of course, we need to be constant prayer with what's going on over there and that, and we'll have a chance to hear about that the next couple of Sundays as well too. But when it comes to this, so we do want to have these things understandable to us, knowing that Christ is the mystery. And then also the fact that some of these things we're going to see are things that don't go all the way back necessarily to Christ and the apostles, but because the Holy Spirit is alive and well in the church, generation after generation, century after century, that some of these things might be a little bit also newer things that we have as well too, that the church has added on to. There are some, for example, one thing that you're going to hear more of at St. Anthony's when you come. You've been hearing the choir sing this beautiful song that they sing, because we have a lot of people here at church, thank God. We have a lot of people coming to communion, thank God. All right? So communion takes a while, even though we have a number of people, clergy that are helping give communion. We have 4 chalices. Imagine if there's just one, like in most normal Orthodox churches, it would be, there's some places that they don't have enough, and so as a result, communion is taking almost about an hour. Welcome, I'm glad you guys are here. Go ahead and pick up, if you don't mind, one of each one of these. I know there's a lot. The Divine Book for Children, you just need one of those. But if you can grab one of those, that'll help you to follow through what we're going to do. So this is actually a very ancient hymn from St. Ephrem the Syrian, but it was taken by a modern deacon who's still alive and kicking, and he put it to music, and it's actually become one of the communion hymns. It's one of the things we're going to be making a reference to that's here. And so part of what my goal for this is just to try to help demystify things that don't need to be mysterious, to make them a little bit more clear, and not trying to force Greek on you, because I barely speak English. At least that's what my family tells me, okay? And so I'm not trying to push Greek on anybody. It's just that after a while, in order to try to explain what these things are, it's almost easier to fall back onto the Greek terminology. It just really is. Now, some of the terms we have anglicized, and so we don't necessarily say them in the Greek pronunciation. Some we do. Sorry about that. If you're expecting consistency, you won't necessarily find it in what we do, especially how we pronounce things. And so that's right. For example, if you're going to our church is called the what church? The Antiochian Orthodox Church. Okay. If you say that in Greek, it's Orthodox. So we have a good friend of ours who's very close to us who likes to say Orthodoxy. It's like, we want to say, Presbyteria, you're here in America. Okay. If you're speaking in Greek, that's appropriate. But that's why we anglicize some words. It just happened. I don't know why. I don't know who ended up doing it. It's because they mispronounced it. Okay. Also, there is a problem with the Greek in America because most of the people who study Greek in this country have not studied with Greek speakers. And so they've learned the Greek, what we call the Erasmian pronunciation. And so you'll hear, like, I learned it on my own, alpha, beta, gamma, delta, and that's not how it goes. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta. So there's a specific way of being able to say it. And so sometimes we follow that Greek pronunciation, sometimes we follow the anglicized, okay? But and also, here's the last thing, just to give you a warning, not to add more confusion, but this is the reality. It's not always spelled the same. It's not always spelled the same. There's can be some slight things, and you think it's bad in Greek, you should see the Arabic. I don't know if you guys remember poor Muammar Gaddafi, right? He was having a hard time with the United States for many, many years, and they would have all these covers, and I remember on the Johnny Carson show, they said the reason why Muammar Gaddafi was having such a struggle with the United States is because we couldn't spell his name right. And they gave all these different covers of Time, Newsweek, magazine, because it doesn't translate well. It doesn't translate well into English. So there is that issue, okay? There's a divergent spelling, so you have to check and see, is this the same thing? And then finally, the other one is sometimes we will use the Greek pronunciation for something, and sometimes we'll use the alternative, which is a Slavic pronunciation. And sometimes, to make it even more confusing, we'll use an Arabic pronunciation, or an Arabic term for it. So I'm going to give you just the basic things so that if you see some of these things, especially in the service, because you should have in front of you not in pink, but you should have the Vespers service, right? You should have the Othro service. It's in white, and that's the one we're actually going to use today and tomorrow. So don't take those home with you. We need those for tonight's service. We need them for tomorrow. We have the bulletin also, because I want to point out to you where these things are. Okay, so that'll hopefully demystify it and make it a little bit easier. And at any time you have a question, please don't hesitate to ask. Because if you don't understand something, you have a question, chances are everyone else is going to need to know about it as well too, okay? Are we all right? Okay, so let's get into our list. The first, we're going to, just to make things even more crazy and confusing, we're going to go alphabetically off both lists. Oh, how fun. Okay, so when we start, the very first thing we have, and please forgive me, this comes out of a book of ours called the Liturgicon. This is like Orthodox Show and Tell. It's supposed to be Orthodox Terminology, but this is kind of like my Orthodox Show and Tell. This is the primary service book you see us using. The deacons and the priests, you'll see us using. So this comes out of the original version of this way back about 4 editions before. This current edition doesn't have this glossary in, unfortunately. So that was a valuable resource. But then this was one that was provided when I went to, seminary, and went to Geneva, Switzerland, and they had at Chambézy at the Ecumenical Institute. We were hosted there, and this was some terminology that had been passed out when we had our meeting with some of the leaders of the World Council of Churches that were there, and then along with the Catholics and the Protestants, and part of it was just trying to help them explain things. So we have 2 lists here. If anyone really wants to has a lot of time on their hands, like we all do, right? Not. Okay, to be able to compile both lists together, let me know, because there's a few things that didn't make it on the list that should have. And I've added a few things there. Oh, the only last thing that I should have probably done, and Bill, if you can go back into, does everyone have something to write on? Do you have anything to write? Okay, because if not, Bill's going to go back into my office or back into the room back there, look in the cabinets and see if there's something to write on, because you might want to add a few notes to this. You don't have to, but it might be something that might be helpful too, okay? And then one thing I will tell you is a lot of the terminology we're going to see, because I spent some time looking up what the actual word means in Greek, and I was just astounded because some of it's very practical. Okay, so the Orthodox Church has a very practical side as well as a symbolic side to it as well too. So we're going to see with some of the help. So if we look at the first one here, it talks about the altar. And of course, the altar we understand is called in Greek. It's nice because most of the time people don't refer to it by its Greek term. Agia trapeza would be what it would be called, the holy table. We usually say altar. When we say an altar, though, however, it has 2 meanings to it. The altar has a double meaning. It is a space and an actual liturgical furniture. So when we say the altar, it could mean the space behind the iconostasis here. This is the iconostasis that has the screen, icon screen with the icon. So that space all the way back in there is technically called the altar. It really more appropriately is called instead something else, and some of you know that. Say it again. The Holy of Holies, because this is this is the sanctuary, the holy place. That's the Holy of Holies, and that comes right out of what? Yeah, Old Testament, right out of the tabernacle, right out of the Jewish temple, right? So that's really, truly. But we commonly say, I might say to some of the guys, go in the altar and grab the icons that have been blessed. You know, I won't say go into the Holy of Holies, but that's really its true name. So sometimes. And once again, please forgive us. Sometimes we use a more common name for that, and it can be a little confusing. Sorry, okay? But that's the way it is in kind of a lot of languages, especially in English, right? Look at all the words that pronounce the same and spell differently, okay? So it's like nothing new. But there's also something else. So when we refer to the altar, it's not only the altar space or the Holy of Holies, but it also means something else too. It means the actual altar table, the holy table is what we would really technically call it. And that holy table is what goes back to, remember, the Jewish practice. Where was that before in the Jewish practice? Do you remember? Was that in the temple? and in the tabernacle and the Jewish temple. Remember where the Jews had the altar? They had a place for oil offerings and incense offerings inside the temple, but the main altar they had was outside, in front of, that's where the animal sacrifice was made, okay? The bulk of them was made, except for the ones during the year when they brought in the blood to sprinkle on the mercy seat, okay, in the Holy of Holies. So the altar is, that now takes on, that being brought into here now talks about reference to the once and for all sacrifice of Christ on the cross, and so that when we celebrate the liturgy, it is a recapitulation of that and echoing back to that once and for all sacrifice. So on the altar, we also refer to the altar as also a couple other names for it, that it is made a reference to being not only the holy table in which the sacraments, the mysteries are placed upon. It's also referred to as the tomb of Christ. Okay, so it's also referred to the tomb, and it's also referred to as also be a throne, the throne of Christ. And of course, one thing that's noted for that is that, and if you guys have seen that, and maybe I've pointed out to you, on there is something in the altar. There's a light that always burns on the altar, and I'll explain that too, because it'll be one of the terminology we hear in just a second. Okay, so the holy table. So if we look at that, and then anonymous is another one of the words. We don't use that so much in at least in our terminology and our parish here, but once again, that is kind of the idea of it's not just a sentimental remembrance of what's happened, it's actually calling to mind again. It's bringing to present that which is in the past. Do this in remembrance of me. It's more than just a sentimental thought about what the Lord has done. It's actually making present that event which is transcend time and space, and being a part of it, connected to that. And that's why you see, especially when we get to Holy Week, the things we do, the service during Holy Week. I mean, Bill will know this, and he's the only one who'll probably know it. The rest of you guys are too young pups. I think you won't remember seeing the crazy school videos. You were there. Remember, it was supposed to be like George Washington is crossing the Delaware, and then one of the news reporters will come up to him from CBS News and interview him as he's crossing the Delaware. It's really hokey. I mean, I never used it when I was teaching, back in the early 90s, because it was so hokey even then. But really, in reality, what we do in those services, we're entering back in. We get to be back there during the Passion, during his Passion, during his crucifixion, his burial, his resurrection. We get to enter into that through the services, which is really powerful. So it's more than just a sentimental. It's more than just a reenacting. Christ is not being crucified again. Once again, it has a very, very strong theological, profound understanding to it, which is a great mystery for that. Okay, now stop me anytime, ask any questions if you need to. All right, we're going to slip over to the other one for the air. Okay, so the air, you see there, air literally means, in Greek, it means cloud. Okay, air means cloud. Okay, and the air has a couple of, the air is the big one here. This is usually a piece of cloth that's usually, it can be embroidered, it can be very plain with at least a cross on it. And the air is what usually covers the chalice and the paten, and we'll show you those in just a little bit. So the air is one of these cloths. It's also used to be able to transport. So in the Greek tradition, we have these two cords to be able to tie it along as here. In the Russian tradition, it's a lot longer and more rectangular, and it's usually placed on the shoulder is how they do it. There's slight traditions you're going to see in the Orthodox Church, how these got fleshed out. You'll see during the pre-sanctified liturgies, this is used as a veil. And why are veils important? This is a very Jewish practice too. There's a lot of stuff we do that's Jewish, but with a Christian understanding to it. Why were the veils important? Anyway, that's okay. Because they help to, they show how sacred something is, because it will be veiled. Because there's power in that sacredness. And so it's veiled to both protect the person who's coming in contact with it, is also to honor the item itself. Remember, that's when Moses came off the mountain and he had that encounter with God, what was happening with Moses? He was shining. So Moses was veiled. Okay, so he was veiled when he saw the people. So this is what we do during pre-sanctified liturgy. When we bring the gifts out, we bring them out covering ourselves. I mean, it's actually drawn down here so we only can see where our hands and our feet are going. Okay, so which is not the best thing when you're transiting the gifts that have already been consecrated. You have to be the most careful with them. We don't do a great entrance, right? Because we do that with the gifts that are on the way to being consecrated in a regular liturgy. But a pre-sanctified liturgy, we bring them out only through here and go in the shortest transit possible. But this is also, so the notion in the church, anything that's holy is usually something it's veiled in that sense. It's to recognize the sacredness of that. And there is also something that you see the priest will do. If there's one priest doing a liturgy, he will be over the gifts and he'll be doing this. Does anyone know why he would be doing this? It has to do with incense. You're right. What do when we offer incense to somebody? It's not incense we're doing over. We're fanning the gifts. Why would we be fanning the gifts? Okay, because it's an act of reverence. It's an act of reverence because once again, and I get because for example, if it's hot out there and I go like this to you, okay, that would be a nice thing to do, right? Well, guess what they used to do in the ancient times? They would be fanning. They didn't have air conditioning. They had the slaves or the servants would be continually fanning the leaders. So if he was having an audience, you'd see the fans on both sides fanning him to keep him cool. There's also another practical purpose. They don't have necessarily windows and air conditioning, and so it's pretty well open to the elements, which means also flies. And so that fanning action also helps keep the flies off. So in a lot of what we do in the Orthodox Church, there's a lot of things that are very practical, but they take on a very strong spiritual meaning as well at the same time. So when the priest is doing this, he would be, Joshua, you're welcome to grab each a set of these things that are on the front pew here. So he's doing this as an act of reverence, okay? If it's one priest, if it's two, we're on both sides and we're doing this way, okay, on both sides to fan the gifts this way. So and if you have other clergy that are doing, everybody grabs a hold of the veil, because the notion is we're con-celebrating, so we're seeking to be involved in this action together. And this is meant to symbolize also the stone that was rolled. Now it takes on a theological meaning. It symbolizes the stone that was rolled over Christ's tomb. And the notion, some people would say, the fanning takes on the notion that it's like the earthquake at the resurrection of Christ, because remember the altar representing Christ's tomb as well too. That's why some priests may go like this back and forth, but then they forget the older practice, which was the act of fanning, which is an act of reverence. Okay, so that's what the importance of the air is that we have on there. And there's also a couple other, let's see if I have in that liturgical book. Oh, did I not bring my other liturgical book with me? That's too bad. That's the one of the resource I had a lot of my stuff in. So there is also in that, let's see if I have it here. I feel something heavy, but that's not it. Okay, so that's fine, I can remember. So that we also have, these aren't one of the terms that are given, but we have two small airs, two small veils, one that's placed over the paten, one that's placed over the chalice. And they each have their own name according to the paten veil and the chalice veil, is literally what it says in Greek, but I won't give, those weren't the terminology that they gave there. But it's interesting that these took on, see I've been a priest, how many years now? Man, 27 years. I've been Orthodox for over 30. Tomorrow we'll be married for 28 years, which is really cool because we're having our wedding anniversary tomorrow. But these now, and during the research for that, I found out these have also a symbolic meaning, which I never knew. All these years using them, that they take on a thing. Does anyone know what these might represent? If this is representing the stone theologically, symbolically over Christ's tomb, any idea what these would represent? that are actual relics that we still have, I believe, even though the Orthodox don't possess these. Aha, the shroud, right? The one over the paten over the Lamb. It represents the shroud of Christ, which I personally believe is the shroud of Turin. I believe it's been preserved since then. And then the other one, we also know it is preserved, and we know it's provenance. And what was that? Yeah, the part that was put over his face. And that was the one that's in a church in Spain. So that's what these symbolize, those actual things. And we know that from what gospel? Remember, gospel talks about those specifically. It's the only gospel that mentions both of those. Do you know which one that was? It's the one who would know the most about those details because he was there personally. John, that's right, St. John. Yeah, so these are, now these can be very simple, they can be very ornate, but there's something that represents, once again, the veiling of something that is holy. Which is why we seek to come into the church dressed modestly, because we're trying to veil our body and not trying to show off. And that's, in the Western sense, there's a different view on that. Okay, so let's go over to agape vespers. Now we have two things for agape. Agape literally means what? It's the highest form of love, right? Self-sacrificing love. Okay, so the agape vespers is literally the vespers of love. And what it is, it's the service on Pascha Day in the afternoon. Okay, and so that's the one where we end up and we read all those Gospels concerning St. Thomas. All right, and that's kind of the one that's making us look forward towards Pentecost as well. So that's usually what that service is. And that service is done similar throughout all of Bright Week. The sad thing is we don't always see it here. We did, this last year do a Bright Week service up at USK. So hopefully, and we've talked to Father Nathan, and we may end up having some services down here, some services up there at the same time. Not that we're trying to divide the community, trying to give more of a fuller liturgical life to people wherever they can go and attend. But then there is the agape that we do, and the agape is a little bit different, but the agape was an ancient practice, and it's mentioned in the scriptures, and of course that's what we do, and that is the what? Right, the love feast, okay, that's done afterwards, sharing, where people would bring, it was like the holy potluck, okay. And St. Paul criticized some of the people in Corinthians because some people were going to their food and eating up, and other people, they weren't sharing. And he was just saying, hello, you come together and you share Christ, and you're not getting to share your food with one another. And that's, and for us, we purposely do one here, even though our community's grown a lot. But everyone's really, really good at still continuing to help with the agape. So we encourage everyone to get on an agape team and be able to help participate with that, because that way, especially for everyone who's fasting, because we fast before receiving communion, we haven't had anything to eat or drink since midnight, and so as a result, it makes it kind of hard. Afterwards, all we have is donuts and coffee. If you've been fasting, you have that splat. And we also want to keep people here to be able to fellowship, because we don't see one another. We don't live in a village. We don't live in a neighborhood. So the agape is very, very important, and I'm glad we've been able to reinstitute that here. If you go over to some of the old countries, they won't necessarily have that. It's just not something that they normally do, although sometimes they're picking up some stuff from what we do and thinking, oh, maybe we should do that. Okay, so let's move back over onto the other one here, anaphora. Anaphora, okay, and in Paris we've got a whole bunch of papers for you to pick up here on the front row. So if you pick up one of each of those, please. Okay, so the anaphora. Anaphora literally means to call to mind again in Greek. So it means to call to mind again, or it means to remember. So the anaphora is something very, very, it's one of the most substantial parts of the liturgy. And if you look in, if you look in the Children's Divine Liturgy book, you should all have one of these, the Children's Divine Liturgy book. And if you look at that, it's on page 26 to 31. Look at that, if you would, please. What's nice is here in the Children's Liturgy book, well, there's some on the front pew here too if you don't have one. Okay, And hopefully these will be complete because we try to keep them together. Paris has been so good to find the ones that are missing stuff, okay? And so the anaphora starts right here on page 26, and it goes all the way here to the end of it. Okay, going all the way to page 31, okay? Where the priest says, "And the mercies of our great God and Savior Jesus Christ be with you all." That's the end of the anaphora right there. So usually in the tradition, if there is a protos, the protos means the first priest that's celebrating. If the bishop happens to be here, he's the protos. If the patriarch's here and our Metropolitan Saba is here, who gets to be the protos? If the patriarch is with us here, Patriarch John X, and Metropolitan Saba is here with us, who gets to be the protos? The patriarch. The patriarch outranks the metropolitan, okay? Unless for some reason the patriarch says, "I just can't do it, and I'm going to have you do it." Generally, the highest ranking priest is usually the one who serves as the protos. However, he can be able to step aside and let someone else to be able to do that as well. The tradition is for us usually to do that whole part by the protos only, except for, of course, with the deacons and their participation. That's why usually when we get to that part, normally we hand it out to the other priests that are con-celebrating with us, but usually we try to do it all together if we can. Now, it may change. Father Nathan told me when he was at the National Convention, and he was serving at the altar with our new Metropolitan, and so he thought it's the anaphora, so the Metropolitan's going to do the whole anaphora, and so he was kind of zoned out at that point. He wasn't worried about what was going on. And the Metropolitan looked at him. It's his turn to do something, and he said, "Father Nathan," and Father Nathan is like, he's trying to remember where we're supposed to be in the book, right? Because he thought the Metropolitan's going to do the whole section, because that's normally what's done. But he's the Metropolitan, and if he says, because he wants the priest to be able to have a turn, because with that many priests celebrating, you're only going to get one chance to be able to do one exclamation. And so it was sweet that he offered to do that, but it threw poor Father Nathan off. And so Metropolitan Saba, he's new to us, so he didn't know Father Nathan that well. And so he asked him after liturgy, "How long have you been a priest?" And poor Father Nathan was so embarrassed. But anyway, but this is a beautiful, beautiful prayer. And this is, unfortunately, in some of the Orthodox churches, they do this at a low voice in the altar, and the faithful don't hear this. A lot of this prayer I do at a softer voice with the microphone on, so people at home can hear it, and not trying to over blast the choir. And our previous Metropolitan, Philip of blessed memory, previous two Metropolitans back, had made sure that he wants to know that especially the key parts of the anaphora, which include the epiclesis, that is said out loud. And that the people have a chance, as you know, I've said this, I've hammered you guys on this, that the people need to say their part, which is the amens. Okay, we're on page 29. Sorry, no, before 29. 26 through 31. So if you look on page 29, that's the epiclesis. We're going to get to that in a second. So the anaphora is a very, very important, this whole, once again, calling to remembrance or remind again, important thing, because it's in the prayers of this, it summarizes kind of the whole mysteries of our faith, the passion of Christ, the resurrection, the ascension, and the second coming. And it's to make those events present to us, which is even mind-blowing because it even talks about the second coming, which hasn't happened yet. So talk about being outside of time and space, okay? So there is meant to be a connection not only with the things in the past, but the things moving towards in the future as well, too. So that's the meaning of that is this, to the anaphora, or sorry, not to call remind again, forgive me, anaphora, I looked at the wrong thing. It's to bear back, it's to be repetition. And the reason why is because there's a repetition of the words, and I thought I put that in here for it, because it ends up repeating some of the words over and over again. If you see that it is meet and right to him that he bless thee, to worship thee in every place of thy dominion. So it ends up, it's kind of repeating over and over again some of these same terminology to try to make sure it's clear to us in terms to understand what God has done with us as part of the great thanksgiving and supplication prayer of the church. All right, and that's why the repetition of some of the words that are done there as well too. Okay, keep on going down that list, we're going to look at the word anditheron. Anditheron. Okay, so here, if you see anything, when you see anti, we think of anti as in Greek meaning opposite, okay, or against. I always used to think it's like the Antichrist or anti-pope, he's against the Pope. Well, it's actually meant to be in place of. It's meant to be in place of in Greek. So the notice when we talk to the anditheron, is talk about in place of the gifts. So the anditheron is what we normally, if you see in the big bread bowl then when people pull out some of the holy bread on Sundays, or when we have a feast liturgy. The anditheron is, there's also could be, it's what is left over from the holy bread that has not been cut out for the lamb. Okay, and those pieces that are cut out, and for example, I'll just show you, and I'm going to pass this out to you in a little bit when we get to the seal and that. It would be better if I were doing this terminology, I'd put this terminology all together according to what it deals with, rather than alphabetical. I would do this very differently because it makes it harder to teach. This is the size loaf, this big one that we have to have for all of you here, because we have a good number of people attending and receiving communion, which is what we want people to come and celebrate the liturgy and be prepared to receive communion. And so we have a thicker, even some of the ones we have are even thicker than this. All right, so this is what we have to have for communion. And then I'll show you in terms of what we take out for the lamb there. This is for a smaller Vesperal liturgy we have, but this is usually when you guys get some of the holy bread, it's usually this kind of bread, and I'll have a chance to pass this out to show this to you. It's a little bit thinner. If you see the seal on it is rather indented, so as a result, it's very hard to get a thick lamb out of that to be able to have enough communion to give to everybody. And so that's why the bishop says you have to have a bigger lamb, bigger bread thus. But this is really good bread. This is the Arabic stuff. This is the Arabic style stuff. This is the Corbin, the Nasser, the cashew. They make that very, very well. And it's a lot yummy than necessarily this part is here. So what happens is we end up using 5 loaves for the communion, generally.
That darker one?
Yes.
Or the thinner one?
Yes.
Is that what goes in the communion?
No.
It's served as the anditheron.
Anditheron, yeah. But we do use 4 loaves of these to cut out of for the Virgin Mary, and then for the 9 ranks, and then another loaf for the living, and then another loaf for the departed. So those are sometimes given to people at the end for memorials, or they're cut up into pieces. And then if you see Father Nathan, he's the one who does this now generally during the anaphora, because I'm doing all those other prayers, I'm doing it as the protos. He will come over and he will take the gifts and he'll bless them over the consecrated gifts at that time. So the grace and the power of the Holy Spirit there is imparted to this, and that's given to the people who aren't, the original purpose was that was given to the people who aren't receiving communion. It is anditheron, it's in place of the gifts. So the ancient practice was everyone was coming to communion, and that was given to the people who didn't receive communion, okay? During our own Middle Ages, people dropped out from frequent communion, for a good period of time. It took several saints to really hammer away to our people that you need to come to church regularly, you need to come to church on Sunday, you need to be prepared to receive communion. And what happened is people had dropped out, and Parish, you might know, I mean.
Absolutely. In the Greek church, they don't receive communion.
Yeah.
Like we do.
And
people every week here
yes.
will come up whether it's for a blessing or communion.
Right.
And I mean, you might get 20 people that receive communion in the Greek church when there might be 200 people in church.
Right. So they're really trying to, and the Greek Orthodox Church are trying to revive that. The Russians have tried to revive that as well too. Everybody has. To realize the ancient practice was everybody who's coming to liturgy should be prepared to be able to receive. We know not everybody is prepared. But the ideal is to then try to step up our game, to fast, to repent, to confess, because these are all good for our salvation. All right, that's a part of the whole purpose. But also then to be able to receive the body and blood of Christ, which gives us the strength to be able to fast, to give alms, to pray, to repent. And so, and it's also for our forgiveness of sins and for life everlasting. And so the notion was then people were to be able to come and receive communion. That's why originally the lambs that were the seals that were in here. Oh, I did grab the seals. What did they do with those? Oh, right here. The seals originally, in this Middle Ages, were kind of small. This is a seal to bake holy bread. So there was kind of small here, because a lot of people weren't coming to receive communion. You can take that and pass it around to take a look at that, right? But then we asked them to make them bigger. Actually, this is not big enough. This is really nice. There was a guy who's with the Lord now who made these and sold these up. He was so good. He was one of our subdeacons in the church, and he was on disability because he had a terrible accident where he damaged his brain, so he couldn't function normally. But the stuff he did for artwork was just amazing. And so he did this as a fundraiser. I'll pass it along. So this shows you the size of lamb that we try to cut it out for. But really, you see, we have a lamb that's about this big on the top, and it's about this thick if we can get it that thick, because we need that for everybody. You could use either one. This one has all of the other ones. This one has the main one for the lamb. Yes, but that's very kind of primitively carved. This is not the best seal, but that one shows the 9 ranks and then the Theotokos that's there. So, yeah, okay. So the anditheron, that means that those people who weren't coming to communion would be the ones who were able to have the anditheron. So that became the common practice for everyone to receive anditheron, because they weren't coming to communion. I've even been in one Greek church where I had to really scramble, and not just to slam on the Greeks, this was because they still hadn't taught their people to restore this as a common practice. And so you have to watch and see what happened, because there'd be some children that would bring up a few little old ladies, and then the priest would almost be like, come out with, with the fear of God, with faith and love, draw you near. And then within 1 or 2 minutes, he would end up saying the exclamation, at the very, very end, and then take the chalice and go in. And so you had to kind of scramble in order to be able to get up there to communion, because they had figured a lot of people had dropped out. But that's why everyone was receiving the anditheron. So here comes the question, and some people are saying, well, now, if it's become common practice for people to take the anditheron, if they receive communion, should they be taking the anditheron? Well, the reality is we've been fasting. It's okay to be able to eat and drink something after receive communion, not before. And so we've been fasting. So the Russians actually have a practice where after people communion, they go over to a little station, a little table, and they have some cut up bread from the anditheron, okay, from the gifts, the bread that's been blessed over the gifts, and then little cups of wine that they end up drinking from, in order to help wash down the gifts and give them a little bit of nourishment to finish out the rest of the service. So I would say, I have one person who chooses not to ever do any anditheron because they've come and received communion. That's fine if that's what they want to do. But if people do receive the anditheron, it's not a problem either. Okay, so that's just what that's end up calling. But sometimes we just call it, instead of anditheron, we more properly call it, or popularly call it, what here in the parish? Blessed bread or holy bread, yeah. So that's kind of the terminology used. Once again, okay, kind of similar, just to let you guys know, all right? Anditheron in place of the gifts, okay? Any questions? All right, so let's move down to, I want to move to, okay, so let's look at akathistos, hymn. Akathistos, hymn, this is the 24 stanzas honoring the Theotokos. It's the akathist that we normally do during Holy Week, on the Fridays of Holy Week. Akathistos means literally standing. It means that we stand during that hymn. And so that's what the word actually technically even means. And this is a beautiful devotion to the Virgin Mary. There are other akathists that are done, and those are also usually done standing as they've done them. They're usually sometimes smaller services. The akathist to the Virgin Mary is about an hour service. The other ones that are about a half an hour in terms of if we do everything for the akathist for that. Okay. Amvon. Okay, here's another one. There's a prayer behind the Amvon. You'll see this in some of the liturgy books. It says towards the end of the liturgy, it'll say the prayer behind the Amvon. Amvon used to be, and Amvon literally means raised in Greek. And the Amvon was that raised platform. Some people also call it the bema, okay? It was a raised platform that was in the Jewish synagogue that was right in the center. It was raised, and that was what was done in the center. Remember, we talked about this before? What was done? The reading of the scriptures and the preaching, the teaching of the scriptures. Teaching and preaching and reading was done from here. Why? Why from here? In the synagogues. Right, because it's central, where everyone can be able to hear. There's no sound system, so it has to be central. So the Amvon was a raised platform that the church took from the synagogue and used. You see it in the Syriac churches, the ruined Syriac churches. You can still see what's there. They actually had stone liturgical furniture in place of the two raised stands. They would have two lecterns, one for the chanters, one for the reading of the scriptures and the preaching. So one was for the choir and the chanters to do. The other one was for the clergy in the turn of the preaching and the teaching. So that kind of pulls just from the Jewish tradition and was raised. Over the years, however, that ended up migrating and getting placed in a different place. So the Amvon ended up getting moved. And the Amvon, we also end up calling it by a different name as well too. So this is, it's usually placed on the solea. Our Amvon is really dinky here in this church. This becomes almost our Amvon right here, these two steps. It's reduced to these two steps here. If you go to some churches, they actually have a pulpit, which is technically could be part of that Amvon because it's a lectern. And some of the Greek churches, they still have some of that there. We didn't have this space. I mean, I got flack for just putting it in the bishop's throne because we had such precious space that's here. But it's essential that we have that there. So what we're trying to do is, and at St. Anthony's, because we had such a limited space here, and we also had some people that were in wheelchairs, that were handicapped. We didn't want to have a higher platform to have to get them up on. We thought it would just be easier to keep, so there wasn't going to be a raised platform. But a lot of Orthodox churches, they will have it raised. What later becomes what we call the solea is raised, and we'll see that in just, solea is one of your terms that's here as well too. Let's see if they have that on here. Yeah, look on page 527 on the Liturgicon list. Here, forgive me, I'm going to jump around a little bit here because it just works better if we talk about it in areas where rather than jump around so much. So the solea is that Amvon with a space that ended up being shifted and put in most Orthodox churches. When you go, you'll find it there. Saints Constantine and Helen, you'll find that raised platform about 2 steps. I can't remember St. Spiridon's. Does St. Spiridon's have a raised platform right before the altar, before the iconostasis? I can't remember.
I think there's a step maybe.
A step up, too. Yeah.
Yeah. Like we have
Yeah.
here.
So it gets moved to that point. So that part, we end up calling that, what used to be that raised platform, ends up being the solea that we end up calling it there. So when I say it's out on the solea, or go light the candles on the solea, it's just easier to say that than the raised platform or on the space out front of the iconostasis. So that's one of the terminology that we end up using for that space. And this is a space where a lot of the liturgical action takes place. This is where you see the deacons coming out and the subdeacons, and also if there's weddings, if there's funerals, if there's certain sacraments, they're done here. And the reason why you'd want to have it, why would you want to have it raised up a step or two, practically? It's kind of like the Jews did. Why would it make sense to have it raised? Yes, because we're all standing. And it raises it up a little bit higher than everyone else, and people can see a lot better because most of our services are done standing. And so it really helps. But the trouble is we had to follow the contours because this was a remodel, remember? Even though it's almost a total rebuild, we didn't realize until we started tearing everything down that's like, we had to tear everything down because we couldn't patch things. So we tore everything down except for this wall and part of the choir wall. If we would have known that, I would have pushed up for another story. I would have pushed up for another story, and I would have, well, I don't know if I would have still would have raised that. But see, but the problem is you raised this up too much, and we're like scraping the ceiling, you know. So anyway, so it does make sense to have that. It does make sense to have that in terms of being elevated so people can be able to see that. All right, so that's what they mean in terms of by the solea. Let's go back to analogian. This is a good one. Analogian. Analogian literally means to read through. Analogian means to read through in Greek. And it's because analogian, there's two kinds of stands, analogian. There's this kind of stand, which could be a lectern. We have the lectern that we roll out, remember? But this is also serves as analogian. Did you know that, see, it has a compartment to put, this can serve as a chanter's stand as well too, but it also serves as an icon stand. Okay, when it serves as an icon stand, it takes a different name. It's not on your list. I didn't want to subject you to that. It's a proskynesion. Proskynisarion is what they call it. It's a reverence. It's a reverence stand because you're reverencing the icons here. So okay, but this they sometimes call it as an analogian because it's used, because this is what people would read from. It was considered to be a lectern. It's also something where we end up placing the icons on. And also this is called an analogian. For those especially who end up serving in the altar, I'll tell them, go move the analogian. And they'll look at me like, what? You know, the sacraments table. Okay, so it just literally means the sacraments table. So it usually would be a movable stand. Some places in the ancient times, they were built into stone in the center of the church. Later, they were moved into where the choir area was. And the choir area is that's another term that they don't have for you there. They sometimes call that the kleros. Okay, we get the word, the choir kind of evolves out of that terminology. And we got some of these pages here. If you want to pick up the two lists here, and then some of these other ones to look at. So the analogian is just that sacraments table. All right, now we're going to get into some more liturgical terms that deal with, let's go back to the other list, the one from Chimpanzee, the apolitikion. Apolitikion is literally means, comes from apolisis, which is dismissal. This is the dismissal hymn, and I'm going to show you in Vespers where that is. So the Politikion means it means basically we're getting towards the end of the service, you're going to be dismissed, and so this is the hymn right before the dismissal. That's literally what it is, okay? So remember, a lot of these terminology is just practical. It's practical stuff, but the Politikion, and sometimes, just to add the confusion, we sometimes use multiple terms on this. So if you look at the Vespers, grab your Vespers book, the Vespers packet on page 10. I think it's page 10. Yeah, page 10. Okay. So you see on page 2 on Vespers. So the service we're going to do tonight, it says Resurrectional Apolitikion in tone tune. And so going further in the Vespers, there's the dismissal. It's right before the dismissal. Because Vespers is the first service of the new day. When the sun goes down, that's a new day liturgically. We denote that in the church because we come in the church, the lights are low, and then we denote sunset by doing what? Turning the lights on. Posilaron. Posilaron agias toxis. Oh, gladsome light. Okay, oh, gladsome light of the Holy. So Christ is the light that comes into the world. So we're into, when we turn on those lights, that is, in terms of the reference, we've come to a new day in that sense. In fact, there's even something I'll show you we do liturgically at that point. And so, but this is the first resurrection tropar, the general resurrection tropar for that Sunday that we'll be singing. The other ones, of course, make reference to Christ's resurrection too, but this is the one. When thou didst submit thyself unto death, O thou deathless and immortal one. And there's a total of 8 different versions of those in 8 different tones that we do. And you'll hear those over and over. We do those in a cycle, unless it's a great feast that interrupts them. When we have tone 1, tone 2, tone 3, all the way to 8, and then we start over again with them. After a while, when you've been around enough, you'll get to know them. In the Antiochian church, they're all the same, thank God. Okay, although there's some people who want to change them, and I'm one of the ones who's saying change, and I'm trying to do it as much as I can not to have us have that confusion, because I know they were done by Kazan, back in the 50s, but I think that most of our people know them, and it really, really helps. So the resurrection Politikion appears there. Now, it also pops up then towards the beginning of Othros. So take out your Othros book, or your packet, and we're going to see that on page 4. With all these prayers we're doing, all the psalms we're doing, we don't get to our first hymn until we do something what they call Theos Kyrios, God is the Lord, and has revealed himself to us, or has shown us the light, depending upon the translation. That's on page 4. And so here we see the resurrection troparion is repeated. This is the first time in the morning that we end up saying it. So it's done towards the beginning of Othros. All right, because in some practice in the Orthodox Church, welcome to the diversity and the confusion. So sorry. Some of the Russian practice will do this as a vigil. So Sunday night will be Vespers and Matins and Compline. When we go to the monasteries, it's a long service Saturday night. Okay, and all that's done in preparation for liturgy on Sunday and receiving communion. So it's quite appropriate, but it's beautiful. We in the Greek and the Antiochian tradition split those up. We put Matins more according to a morning service than do it as a vigil, but it can be done as a vigil. But that's when you see this Politikion, this end of the service hymn comes at the beginning of the service. Okay, so sorry for the confusion and contradiction. But if you see a Politikion, it just means towards the dismissal, even though if it shows up here, you've got a long ways to the end of Matins. Okay, does that make sense? No. Sorry about that. Okay, and then in the Divine Liturgy, it's repeated again, because this is the most important resurrection hymn of that Sunday. And so it's going to be repeated. If you get your bulletins, let's see if I got this right. On page... your bulletin's on page 3. Let's see if I got the right one on page 3. You got the bulletin? Bulletin. Did everyone get a bulletin? Sorry, a lot of stuff to have to work with, guys. Let's see if I got the right page here. Please, God. Yes. Okay, good. It's page 3. Page 3. Okay, excellent. So page 3, can anyone find where it says the resurrection Politikion? This is not meant to be a trick. Do you see a Politikion? Okay. All right, so it does the Politikion for the Holy Fathers. Now, notice what they did. They fudged on us. They said tropar. Troparion. Troparion simply means a hymn. It's a type of hymn. So sometimes the word troparion is used as a Politikion. I am so sorry, guys. I wish we're not. If you want to join an Orthodox religion, Orthodoxy is not an organized religion. But so tropar is a type of hymn. It's a type of hymn, but it's so sometimes we use both the word troparion for a Politikion, and that's kind of appropriate because the reason why it's appropriate here is because it's not toward the end of the service, and that might be why they use it for that, because it's not a Politikion, which means towards the end of the service. We're not at the end of the service here. This is towards the beginning of the service of the liturgy. But it would be appropriate for them to say the Politikion because it was the first resurrection hymn for the day that we sang at Vespers. Okay, so I'm hoping this doesn't add to the confusion, but helps to clarify things. It is kind of complex. Okay, but notice you do have the Politikion for the Holy Fathers. That we're going to see at Vespers, the same place as the resurrection. We're going to see that at Matins at the same place. And we're going to see that here in the liturgy, at that point of the liturgy, towards the beginning of the liturgy. So there's the key places where we'll see those. So that's why when those terms are there, they're given there for that reason. They're really given for the chanters and the altar servers, especially the chanters and the protos, needs to know these and where they go. Right? And there might be some times, for example, when you see there's a urge change in things, it's because maybe the priest didn't do his job in previewing the service when it was given to him by the person who worked on it and realized, oops, I had overlooked something that was a mistake and I have to change things. Yeah, I don't know if you noticed what happened on Sunday. Deacon Tom was starting to read a different gospel. It's like, no, my sermon's based on, I have to have that gospel. It's like, no, it's a good gospel, but it's not the right one. So sometimes, so so the politique just literally means, in terms of dismissal. Okay, and then looking similar to that is, let's look at anavathmi. Anavathmi. Anavathmi literally means steps. And I'm going to show you where that is. Look on your Matins booklet, page 6. Matins, Orthros, excuse me. Here's another terminology. Forgive me. See, here's where these lists are still not complete. They're not complete. Because we call it Matins quite a bit, a lot of times, but that's the Latin name. Okay? It's all, in Greek they call it Orthros. Okay? All right, and so for the Orthros or the Matins book, look on page 6. You're going to see what they call the anavathmi. And the anavathmi are those specific hymns, and the reason why they're saying this is because these were Orthros hymns based on the Psalms of Ascent. This is what's kind of cool. These were the ancient psalms that the Jews said in their pilgrimage as they made their way to the temple for the holy days. So the Psalms there, from the Psalms of Ascent, as they call them, for 119 to 133, all those are actually pilgrimage ones going to the temple. And so these would end up being said in copying of those faithful Jews in the practice. Now we're in the temple here, and our ascent is ascending on the lectern steps that were in the center of the church. So it basically say, these are the steps hymns. That's really a practical term. You sing these on the steps, okay, because you're going and ascending up on the steps. And that's the purpose. And in doing that, we're imitating what the Jews were doing going to the temple. We are now in this is our temple, ascending in the liturgy, going to the Holy of Holies as we go through the Matins hours here. So that's specifically what those make a reference to. They're called also the songs of degrees, okay, because of the movement we're having towards God and His holy place. All right, and some of those, if you see those, are all based on the different tones of the resurrection. So there'll be one for tone 1 all the way up to tone 8. And so every Sunday, those are plugged in after a book called, it's not on your list, Anastasa Materian, the hymns for the resurrection. All those are plugged in every single Sunday according to when we go through the different tones 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Right now we're getting into, if you saw on the Matins and Vespers, what tone is it tonight? We're switching into tone 2. We're going to tone 2, yeah. Which is going to be fun tonight. I'm going to probably be in the choir helping the choir out because my wife's not feeling well. She's staying home to garner her strength for tomorrow. Hopefully be able to join us. And both of my girls are up in Modesto at the delegates meeting. They're being faithful representing our parish, but we're kind of left in a little bind. So I might be in the choir helping out tonight. Okay, there's another one here. After that one, I love this one. This is Anixeteria. Now, I tried to find some of these for you, not that it would make any difference. The Anixeteria you've never heard in St. Anthony's before. It's never been done at St. Anthony's before. But I want to have it done at least once a year. And I know somebody like Michael is not going to be happy with me, okay? But it's absolutely beautiful. But you could be able to sit down for it, okay? This is when we do the opening psalm. I want you to see the opening psalm here. It's really, really, really cool. And the reason, once again, is because the Anixeteria is one that's done, if you look on Orthros, Vespers. Grab the Vespers one. Look on the very first page, page 1. The Anixeteria is a specific way of doing psalm, the very first psalm. What's the very first psalm? That's on Vespers. 103, very good. Psalm 103, okay? Bless the Lord, O my soul. So is traditionally done in a great festal Vespers. That means it's the feast of the church. It's only done once a year. So for Holy Cross, we get to hear this at Holy Cross for their feast. Absolutely gorgeous. It's beautiful. And if it's done right, there's also a way that the people join in on the psalm. Now, we already do that, right? I mean, we already do, bless the Lord, O my soul, blessed art thou, O Lord. And how great art thou, O Lord. Remember, we have that, there's that version of it that we jump in and we help do it as they're intoning the psalm, right? That means we're stepping up because it's a little bit more celebratory and participatory. Because here at St. Anthony's, we're really trying to have, the liturgy is the common work of the people. It's not meant to be a liturgical opera between the altar and the choir. It's meant to be, the choir is leading the faithful in doing the service, okay? And so this one, it becomes a little bit more elongated because, for example, they will go through the psalm about part of the way, and then they'll start chanting it. About halfway through, they start chanting it, and it goes something like this. The earth is filled with thy creation. So is this great and spacious sea. Alleluia. And then so the Alleluia is thrown in, or glory be to thee, O God, or thrown in as responses for the people to join in. It's actually pretty. We've never had the ability to be able to do it yet. We just haven't had it. It just takes a high level of chant to be able to do that. So I'm hoping eventually we'll have some of our chanters could be able to do this. It's nice if we could have one person leading it and have everyone jump in with the refrains, which is kind of what we do anyway for a lot of our Vespers. So we're kind of familiar with this. But it does take a little bit longer in how it's done. Holy Transfiguration Monastery has a version of it. I have never been able to sing it note for note for the way it is, which it doesn't have to be done for note for note. But if you're trying to sing it together as a group, it is. But it can take a chunk of time. When we do this at Holy Cross in the Greek, it would take at least 35 minutes just to do the psalm. All right? It's that long. Now, it's glorious. It's absolutely beautiful. And you're only doing it once a year for the feast. Now, the way I've seen it do it at the Holy Transfiguration Monasteries, it's about 15 minutes. So it makes, and if you're also doing Archegalacia, that means Vespers, which is normally an hour service, ends up becoming an hour and a half. But then for the great feast, that's fine. But that's not something we have the skill or capability to do at this point. But in the future, it might be something we do. So we may come across that as well. Okay. All right. And then this has just jumped all over the place, guys. I'm so sorry. Now I'm teaching this. I realize how disconnected this is all over the place. This is frustrating. Okay. So if you look at the next terminology here on the Shembasi, one is apophatic theology, apophasis. And what is apophasis literally means, apophasis in Greek means denial. Okay? Literally what the ancient Greek word meant was denial. But what we're talking about in apophatic theology is what? Yes, it's easier for us, and that's why for us as Orthodox, because we've had so many people create heresies by trying to say what God is. Arian, Nestorius, right? Some of these other people that we kind of shied away and say it's much better for us to describe the way what God isn't, right? Because we can be able to say that a little bit more. And once again, we can never define God, but we can describe him. And that's why in the anaphora, when we start off with the anaphora, one of the things we end up saying is, it is meet and right to honor and bless thee, to praise thee, give thanks to thee, and worship thee in every place of thy dominion. For thou art God. And here's where the apophatic theology comes in. Listen into the prayer. For thou art God, ineffable, inconceivable, invisible, incomprehensible. Right? So there's these apophatic descriptions of God that are there. And that helps us in terms of trying to have a better approach of building up in terms of to try to figure out our relationship with God. It's easier for us to say what he isn't than it is for us to say what he is, because God is ultimately a mystery. Because think of it this way. Just think of it in our own terms. Some of us that are married, right? Or maybe we have a parent or a sibling that knows us really well. Okay? Would that person be able to describe everything about us? Why not? It's just too complicated. We're much more than that, right? Can we even describe everything about ourselves? No, I mean, so if we're a mystery, and if the other person around us is a mystery, imagine how God, even much so. So for us as Orthodox, we understand that this makes a better approach in terms of how to do this, in terms of the base of understanding God as a mystery in that sense. Okay, any other questions on that part? Because there's a lot there. Okay, so we want to show you also another thing from the script, from the service book, Apostica. If we look on the Champazi list, where it says Apostica, Apostica literally in Greek means on the verses. It's on the verses is what it literally means from the Greek. And I'm going to show you where the Apostica is. The Apostica is, especially in Vespers, if we see it on page 9, look at your Vespers booklet on page 9. So it's making a reference to the verses that go there, verse 1, verse 2, verse 3. It's the three primary hymns that are there for the Apostica. But because it's on the verses, we're singing those on the verses, what they meant a reference in the Greek is they're saying these are the hymns towards the end of Vespers. So once you get to the Apostica, we're almost done with the service. And usually during the Apostica is when we have, if you guys have been here before, you've seen any processions with the icons that we end up doing, or if we do the Arctoglossia service, which we'll talk about in a little bit too. So those are those ones that are done towards the end of Vespers, and usually for non-festive matins, which we don't normally do because we don't normally do a daily service here. Okay, and then Antiminsian. If we go back at the one for the Liturgicon one, because we did the Anditheron. Anditheron is, of course, place of the gifts. We did that with Antiminsian is Antiminsian. So if it's anti, it means in place of what? Does anyone know what it would mean in place of? It means in place of the holy table, in place of the altar. And some of you guys, we had a chance to see this from before. Remember, we had these up for veneration. This I get to take back to the chapel at USK. This is what the bishop gives to us. It has the relics of the martyrs from Nicomedia, 6,000 martyrs of Nicomedia that are sewn into here. It has the bishop's signature you can see on the bottom here. And this looks a lot like another icon that we use during Holy Week, the Epitaphios. We showed this to you guys before, but some of you weren't here. And this has the one, of course, why would this be appropriately placed on the altar table? And we place the gifts, we place the chalice, and we place the paten on top of this. Why would this be appropriate icon for that? Think about it. Right, he is the sacrifice. So it's making a reference to the once and for all sacrifice that we are in that amnesis that we're doing. We're calling forth that. We're participating in that once and for all sacrifice. We're not re-crucifying Christ again. No, that can't happen. But we're drawing back to that. And so that's why this icon is most appropriate for the one that's there, for the burial. So that makes a reference that this is also, the altar becomes at that point also Christ's tomb. Okay? In that sense, the place also, and it's not just the tomb because of where he was buried, but what is even more significant that transforms that tomb? The resurrection. The resurrection, because we're not just stuck in the tomb. We just don't end it with that. Okay? We take it more than that. So this is the Antiminsian. The Antiminsian, as I said to you guys before, when we did a sermon on this, when we presented to the whole community to be able to venerate, this became more popularly used during the iconoclastist period, when you had the people who were supporting the use of icons were kicked out of the churches, and their bishops that remained faithful to the Orthodox faith and the practice needed to be able to go someplace to celebrate where they could be able to do so. They didn't want to go into some of the profaned churches that were not canonically connected with them, because they had gone into heresy and destroying the icons. And so as a result, the bishop gave them the permission, and that's why the signature on these cloths were done, to be able to show you have permission to be able to serve the liturgy for me, and they could be put anywhere. It became like a portable one to be able to do in that desperation, in that period of need, which is something also remember during the catacomb period for the Russians, and when a group of the Russian bishops and clergy had sided with the communists trying to save themselves, and they were called, can't remember the term they gave to themselves, but they ended up taking over a number of the churches that were left. And so that's why the people had to be able to have the antimony signed by their bishops, because remember they lost a lot of bishops that showed that they were canonically connected with one another in that chaos and that confusion. So it's not just something way back to the period of iconoclasm. I mean, the church has seen the need for that, unfortunately, during the communist period, especially in Russia. Okay, so antimons means in place of the holy table, in place of the table, right, in place of the table, antimensian, very good. Okay, and then, okay. All right, let me go back to this one here. We got to Apostica Archimandrite. We don't have any archimandrites around here. We might have an archimandrite. Father, how many guys have met or seen Father Anthony, who's been with us?
Are you talking about the chaplain?
Yes. Yeah. He could, yes. He could become an archimandrite because he's a celibate priest. So he could be given the title of archimandrite. It literally means, archimandrite means the head of a monastery. Okay. Now, that means he won't necessarily have his own monastery. He would head up. That's traditionally, so we don't necessarily use the word abbot. That's the popular Western term. We say archimandrite. Okay? But, we've also utilized the same term, abbot and abbess. But for archimandrite, it's usually given to a celibate priest. After so many years, he's proven himself. And that also means he can be one of those selected to become bishop. So they usually won't be selected as bishop unless they've been made archimandrite. But they need to be one who is celibate or widowed. Okay, so like Bishop John, who was here for our consecration. All right, so we don't normally get to see that, but when I saw Father Anthony, and when he explained to me, because I didn't know anything about him, and he said, "Oh no, I'm not married. I'm celibate." And I said, "Oh," I came, "Oh, a future bishop," and gave him a big hug, pushing me away. Anyway, that's kind of fun. All right. Let's look then over at, we're trying to get through the A's here. All right, Antimensian, Politikian, we already talked about a Politikian, Apostica we did, Arctoglacia. Okay, Arctoglacia. Arctos means literally the breaking of the bread. I don't know if any of you have been here for a festal service for Vespers where we've had the 5 yum loaves that are brought out here on that stand. We have on this beautiful analogian stand. We bring out that little stand that has the candlesticks on it, and it has the containers for the wheat, the oil, and the wine, and then we stack 5 loaves in the center. It's a beautiful thing. So for great feasts, and also for our patronal feast, we will usually do that. The people can bake those loaves of bread. We usually have Yolanda's done them in the past for us, generally, but also we've had some like Patty Diaz used to do those for us as well too, and they come from a special recipe because they have a little bit of a sweeter taste to it, and some. It's kind of like the Pascha bread with some. Can have miski and maklab and some of those spices that are added to them as well too. There's a Lenten version for the Lenten period. There's some that isn't, and those are the 5 loaves that are placed here in the center during the Apostica. Remember now we've used some of those terms. The Apostica hymns that towards the end of Vespers, as we also add something called the Litia, and the Litia is one of your terms in here. The Litia is this procession that we do, this procession and this series of petitions. We bring the festal icon out, and we go around it 3 times. And once again, the reason why we go around it 3 times is why? Anytime you see us do it with an icon or in a wedding, we go around 3 times, what does that represent? Okay, very good. Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's true. 3 times for the Trinity, of course. But it was because we used to do this as a procession outside. as a longer procession. But then because of usually persecution, we weren't able to do it. So the church, we would do it 3 times around here to show a longer procession than it would normally be. And so that's what it meant to be a longer procession. So that would be a procession for the feast, that they would go from church to church to church. I mean, Russia and Bulgaria and Greece, they've restored a lot of those processions. We here in America still don't do them as much. On the Feast of the Cross, the procession of the cross, we actually did went around the block. That might have freaked out some of our parishioners when we did it, but we actually went around the block to bless the community here. There's just like a couple families that were out. I don't think anybody knew what was going on. It is a nice thing to be able to do, right? Okay, but anyway, so the Arktoglasia service is those 5. Arktos means bread. Arktos is in Greek. It's another term for bread. And the service of the 5 loaves of those 5 breads. And why would there be 5 loaves?
Because it's easier than bringing the fishes.
Okay, it's definitely easier than the fishes, right? 5 loaves because of what? That's right. That's right. For the miracle of the 5 loaves, right. So it makes a reference. Again, there's actually a prayer where it asks to bless and multiply these in the homes of the people celebrating this feast. And bless the people who offered the loaves, because this becomes what we see in the terminology. It becomes an oblation in that sense that they're offering, an offering that they're giving. And so that's done, and that is then taken up and it's cut after it's blessed. And the way we do it is when we sing, remember that we sense around the gifts, a beautiful hymn to the Theotokos, okay? And then we have another set of petitions that we do. We do a whole where we call about all the saints at that time. So we're asking for prayers for the community at that point. And then finally, we do the breaking. And that's the song we most commonly use when we pray before meals. And it probably could be translated better. The translation I got from Antiochian Village, because that's what they were using at camp. It's really not a good translation, but we're kind of stuck with it, okay? We sing, the wealthy shall want and shall hunger, but they that seek the Lord shall not want for any good things. That comes right out of the scriptures, okay? But it should be, rich men have turned poor and gone hungry. See, that's a different thing. Because it sounds like those people are wealthy are condemned to that. And what's it saying? In this life, rich men have turned poor and gone hungry, but they who seek the Lord shall not fear for any good thing. Okay, so it shall be their needs spiritually shall be provided for them. Okay, and so that is the hymn that we normally do. And when we do that, if you remember, those who have been here for that service, what do we do when we sing that hymn? We do the Arktoglasia. We break the bread. We break the bread. We try to break it in the sign of a cross. Okay, and that's what then taken and cut up. The wine is traditionally poured over that and given back to the people at the end of the Vespers. This was also done during a great feast, usually on the night before feast, because what was happening is people were there for the all-night vigil, and they needed something to nourish them to get through to the next day. So it was kind of meant to be a holy snack in the vigil at that point to help them get through the rest of the night and into the morning. Okay, and it didn't break the fasting rules, but it was done at that point. So it's kind of a nice service to be able to do. We do it as people are able to offer the bread. Sometimes I will cheat, and I'll go to Winco and buy the Armenian gata bread. If I can't get someone to offer it for me, and I'll get that because it's the closest I can get to that, even though it has kind of a special filling for it. So I can't usually use that during Lent because it's not exactly Lenten. But that's a kind of a comparable bread that we have there for the Arktoglasia. Okay, any other questions as I throw things at you continually? All right. Okay. And then we have another one that's here, the Artophorion. Artophorion, artos means, once again, we said, artos means bread. Okay, the bread. Okay, the Arktoglasia is when the breaking of the bread. So the Artophorion, this is an Artophorion right here. This is an Artophorion. So this is what we use. This is, another name for this is also, 2 names for this. And sorry, once again, for the confusion. We also sometimes call this a tabernacle, all right? And sometimes we also, in the Western terms, call it a pyx. Pyx, P-I-X, is sometimes what they use for it in the Western terminology, the Latin terminology. But the Arctophorion is one where you can see with the icons that are here. When we do pre-sanctified liturgies, we sanctify an extra lamb on a Sunday morning, and then it's placed into here. And it's kept into here until we use it for the pre-sanctified liturgy. So that's what this is. And this is usually on the altar most of the time. It's empty now because we've had so many people. This is a good sign. I love it. The fact that this is empty means because Father Nathan and I have been busy giving communion to people who are shut-ins or people who are sick. It means we've gone through. It used to be when I first got here, this thing would be full of the previous years, and we wouldn't get through it. We'd end up consuming the bulk of it. But we're actually to the point where the last of the pre-sanctified gifts are in the main Arctophorion, which is the tabernacle that's there. If you guys see the light that's there on the altar, behind that, the domed structure that's there. Actually, get up, and if you want to take it, if you can't see it, come get up, and I want you just to see. Make you move a little bit too if you haven't seen it. Just step up on the ambone. Now that you know the terminology, you know all the terminology. Now step up on the ambone. Okay, this is here. You can step here. Lightning's not going to strike you if you see. But if you see behind the lamp that's there, that's the Arctophorion, or what we call the tabernacle. You see the dome structure behind the lamp? Okay, so that's what contains. There's a little drawer, and the drawer is only about this big, and it's about this thick, and that it's full of pre-sanctified gifts. So that's why this is always kept on the altar, and so that when we cross over in front of the altar, you see a lot of times when we move by, we're making the sign of the cross and bowing because Christ is present with us and the gifts, and that's why that lamp is always to be kept lit. Every single other lamp is extinguished when we leave this church, but that must be kept on because that's the vigil lamp. Okay, so that. No, because it's on glass. We have it in glass. We have it in metal. No, but it's supposed to be kept. But yeah, believe me, I'm really. Oh yeah, because after what happened to St. George when they had their fire over there because it was one of the lamps back there, we try to make sure that when we leave this place, and every now and then we find some things that got left on, and I have to go back in. You can tell when all the lights go off because it's really dark in here, and you see. But then it fools me sometimes because we have a nice shiny interior here, right? And so the light from that will shine here, and I think it's one of the processional lamps. It's like, oh man, I forgot to blow it out. And I go back in, it's like it's just this. It's a reflection. Okay, but then I'll show you the other one here. So that's what you get to see for the Arctophorion. That's what they call that, but we practically call it the tabernacle. And then we are definitely going to have to do this in a two-session segment, Bill. Sorry. Okay, this is a portable Arctophorion. So this was given to me at my ordination as a priest. So in the ancient times, if priests were going to visit people, they would put the gifts in here, the blood of Christ, if they had been a vessel that was saved from before. We especially have that. We saved that from a chalice, especially for some of the sick in the hospitals where they can't swallow much. They can take something on the tongue. Shemasa Zenetta wasn't supposed to be swallowing anything when we were there, but thank God we had an Eritrean or Ethiopian Orthodox medical aid that was there in her room, and she knew how important this was, and so she talked to the nurse, and the nurse said, yes, we put a little bit on her tongue. That was good, so she was able to have communion before. And then normally it's kept, because there's another thing that's put on, the exorcism that's put on top, and that's put on over this. So if the person's going to visit someplace, this is normally how they would take communion with them. Now, I did use this at first, and then I found out how problematic it was because it's just not as safe, especially some of the little components and compartments they had there didn't secure the gifts very well. And so I used this sparingly. I have a better thing that was set up that I got from the Russians that they use that's a lot more confined and a little bit more able to protect it. But that's when you hear about the story of St. John of Damascus, when he was martyred in the 1820s, when there was a great massacre of the Christians in Damascus. that's what he had, that he was jumping from rooftop to rooftop to rooftop to be able to take and give communion to the families before their martyrdom. And so that's normally what traditionally would be done to carry the gifts, okay? And so that's what we mean by artophorion, okay? Okay, we're almost done with the A's here. Okay. Okay, the other one, automelon, is one you might sparingly see, but you usually don't see it in our books. You don't usually see it here in the Vespers, and that just means a self-melody. And it's a special melody that does not follow the Urmi. It's not so much as important. There's also a hymn that we call the Glory Hymn. It's called the Doxosticon. And that's one of the things that's on your list that's there, the Doxosticon, if you look up. And that is anyone that says glory to the Father and to the Son and the Holy Spirit, that's the Doxosticon. And that usually is a longer hymn that's also talked about for the feast that's going on, the special thing, the feast that we're celebrating. If you look, there's 2 Doxosticons that we have here. If you go into the Vespers booklet, just to show you, because that's where they appear in your services, and they're even listed as that. The first one is on page 5 of the Vespers booklet, where it says Doxosticon of the Holy Fathers. Because we're celebrating the feast of the Holy Fathers of the Fourth Ecumenical Council, this is a special hymn to honor them. And so this hymn, and why is it Doxosticon? Because it comes after the glory. That's it. All right, it's the glory. We would say it's the glory hymn, but then some people say the Doxosticon. Okay, so that's no mystery. It just has to deal with the glory. And then if you see, and it's done in 2 places, because these are the old Lord I Call hymns. They didn't list those as the Kekageria. Thank God they didn't list that one, because that's not commonly used. In the Greek church they use that, but we don't normally call it by that. But if you look on page 9, you see the second one that's in Vespers, and there's another one, Doxosticon, and guess what it's dedicated to? The Holy Fathers. Makes sense. Why? That's the feast we're celebrating, right? So those, it makes sense that we're going to see. All this makes common sense when you understand it. It's not meant to be mysterious. It can be confusing because sometimes we use, is this Doxosticon a hymn? Yes. Okay, is it an apologetikion? No, because it's not done towards the end of it is done kind of towards the end of the service, but it's not the last one that's done to the end. So even though there is still a hymn, it's a special kind of hymn and a special designation. Is that something you really need to know? Well, guess what? If you're going to join the choir, all right, some of you who are interested in joining the choir, some people have been very patient about waiting to get into the choir, okay? So that would be something that is important to know after a while, some of the terminology. But for most of us, it's not something we need to know. They're also in the Matins booklet. The Matins booklet, if you look in Matins, we have only one Doxosticon, and that's on page 12. Page 12, after the praises. Sometimes what happened, people, I noticed even in seminary, some of the people, the praises would be a little bit too much because they're in Greek, so people would be seated in the pews for that. But when we got to the glory, that's usually when everyone stood up, okay, because of what was honoring and being spoken about. And if you notice in that one in Matins, who is the Doxosticon for? The Holy Fathers. Okay, yes. So they're hammering you about the Holy Fathers here, okay, for the feast. It makes sense, okay? All right? Okay, so let's look then at, both glory, the both now and ever. Okay, the apostolos is one that we don't have here. Apostolos. There is something called apostolos. Sorry, it's not on your list. You can write it in if you want to. Apostolos, it's A-P-O-S-T-O-L-O-S. Apostolos. Think of what you've heard. You already know what this is. It deals with the apostolic, it deals with the apostles. So if apostolos, meaning a book of the apostles, what would that be? Well, that's a different one. Evangelion, that's a different one. Okay, very good, very good. It could be that one, right? But it isn't that one. So what other one would it be? Acts is included, and what else? and the epistles. So it's really, we call it the epistle book. Epistle. Okay, but it's apostolos, okay, is how they normally call it. But even in Greek, this is what they would say, the epistle lectionary. Okay, you can look at that. And so all the different, for each day of the year, for each feast, the main feast of that day, okay, or what's assigned for that day, the church early on by the 4th century, 3rd to the 4th century, already had the scripture readings figured out from the scriptures. Right around the same time, they're deciding which scriptures are supposed to be in the Bible. Okay, so it's about that time. And so what happens is you have them all throughout the different period of the year, and then also for the feast of the month, and then also for special occasions. And so you guys can take a look at this one here. Just be careful you don't drop or pinch yourself with it. Okay, so this is the book of the choir. This always stay in the choir. This never goes into the altar, because this is, it's not technically the lay people's, but in a way it is. It's the lay people's book, even though it's the readers that may be reading from it. But it's meant to be the one, because generally we have in our tradition who reads the epistle. In at least our Antiochian practice here at St. Anthony's, who reads the epistle? The deacon is the one who's always reading the gospel, the evangelion. He's always reading the gospel, which the gospel comes from evangelion, okay, the good news, all right? But the epistle, who usually reads our epistles? Oh, people from the choir, or from the parish. Like, for example, it's Women's Month, you see the women coming up. All right, we don't have Men's Month. I don't know why we don't have Men's Month. Okay, all right, but because, whatever. So anyway, but with the women who are doing it during that month, and now this month, who you see a lot of them that are reading it? The youth. We actually ask the youth to come, and of course, we want them to be able to read liturgically, because it is a little difficult, and it can be scary. You can't just give it to anybody to be able to do so. My wife, I'm going to tell on her because she's not here. On her. She was in the wedding for her sister, Lorraine, and they were really nervous about everything about that. Anyway, it's all turned out really wonderful. He's been really, really good with Lorraine. It's a wonderful thing. The guy comes from Syria, raised in the Caribbean. That's interesting. And John was the one we spent last January at their place for about 2 weeks. But anyway, in the wedding, they're nervous because this is the first one in the family getting married. It's a daughter, and so she was in the wedding, but she was also supposed to read the epistle book, and it was one of these heavy epistle books like this, and they've got it on film. So she was nervous and trembling. She's read the epistle all of her life, but this is hard when it's your sister, who's a really close friend, and all the stress that goes along with weddings. And so she's finished with the book, and she meant to close it, and it just fell out between her fingers and trembled. You hear this slam of the metal on the floor. Anyway, she's normally pretty good about that. She hasn't dropped one since. All right, so that's what apostolos means, and apostolos, of course, is one that is, we almost always, every liturgy has something from the epistles and also from the gospel. In some of the Western churches, they might have Old Testament readings from that as well, okay? All right, then let's go on to this other one we have here on page, on page 524, where it says bow. When they talk about bowing, there's several times when in the service it says bow your heads to the Lord. Why would that be done? I mean, bow is easy. We don't have to have a terminology for that. We understand what bowing means. And we don't mean a curtsy, okay? Well, bowing, we don't mean a genuflection, which is what's done in the Western church tradition, okay? That is a bow. That's a reverence. It's akin to the same thing that we're doing. And you see, when they usually do it, they do that, and they're doing it towards the altar. So it's the same respect they have towards what used to be on their altar was the tabernacle and the pre-sanctified gifts. Now, in the Roman Catholic Church, if they do a major remodel, they have to move it off the altar. So it causes confusion. Where do you bow towards? Because you're supposed to do towards the gifts that are on the altar. So the Orthodox Church has still maintained the tabernacle on the altar. So there's a bow, and there's times when it says bow your heads to the Lord. Usually when people bow, they bow. And also sometimes when people make the sign of the cross, they end up following it with a simple bow. There's some times when people will bow quite a bit, and because there's some places in the rubrics where it says to bow low. It even says to the priest at the beginning when we do our service of keron, which is which means time, special time. The service when we're getting ready to enter the altar, and then to vest, and then to do the preparation of the gifts before the liturgy. So we're here like an hour before doing prayer services before Matins even begins. And so there's a point where in the rubrics where it says bow low, the priest bowing low. So we bow at the waist. Okay, now we live in America. We live in America that's thrown off British monarchy for 200 plus years. So we just don't have this in our psyche, in most people in America. But you get this if you come from a country that has a monarchy, and the church, of course, coming at a time when there was a Byzantine emperor, got it pretty well too, even though we don't have any emperor anymore per se. So there's that type of a bow. Why would people be bowing their head? Okay, it is an act of reverence, all right? An act of reverence, okay? And let's look at this real quickly because it's even within the context of the prayer. If you look on, because I have these written down here, reverence, under reverence. I think it's under reverence. Because if you look, and we have this in, we have this in the Vesper service. Look on page. Look on page 8. That's after the peace has been given, and then the deacon gives the instructions. Let us bow our heads to the Lord. Okay, it can be simple bowing of our head, and it's meant to be that we do bow our head. The deacon is saying this is something we need to do, because when you bow your head, what are you doing? It's hard to. You are reverencing, but you're also submitting to authority, and you're opening yourself up to vulnerability. Yeah, when you bow your head before someone, especially to an authority, they can take a sword and cut it off. Okay? That's what people are commanded to do if they're going to be executed. But what we're doing is an act of reverence, saying, and that's why we also, our tradition, our protocol, we don't put our hands in our pockets. We don't put our hands behind ourselves, right? Et tu brute, right? Okay? So we're trying to come before God that we're totally open, but we're also recognizing His rule in our life. God, you rule over everything, including my body. This body is yours. I've been bought with a price. And that's trying to thus live that life in that way. And so bowing in that way is a way of physically recognizing. But here's the beauty's in the words, and we usually say these words. This was not done. This is a modern thing for us to say this prayer out loud. But one of our bishops, a way back, probably before Philip, Anthony, I think. Bishop Anthony Bashir was one who said, no, the people need to hear this prayer out loud. And he asked the clergy to say this prayer out loud so they understand why you're bowing your heads. Okay, and it says, look upon thy servants and thine inheritance, for unto thee the fearful judge who yet lovest mankind have thy servants bowed their heads and submissively inclined their necks, awaiting not help from men, but entreating thy mercy and looking confidently for thy salvation. So this is an acknowledgement physically as well as spiritually as well as psychologically. God, you're seeking, you are my help. You are my salvation. You're my shield and my buckler. And so that's why those are put in there in a concrete way. It's just like if you see, for example, and I'm not smashing on America. America has a specific way in which she does things. If you go to the Olympics and you see when the head of the state of the country that's hosting the Olympics, if you watch when they go by with the flags, almost every single country in the world, what will they do when they come, the people in the procession of the athletes and the person who's carrying the flag, what will they do? Lori knows. What will they do? They'll take the flag and dip it before the emperor. But if you look at the American flag, it never dips. It never dips because we don't dip to any. This is our thing saying, we don't have a king anymore. You may be a good person for all you are, but we're not dipping our flag to you in that sense. So our understanding for us as Orthodox is we're recognizing that sense this we're doing not before men, but before God. Okay, and it's that symbolic gesture, but it's also meant to be that we do this throughout our whole life. Not just here at church symbolically, but we do it in our whole life. Okay, does that make sense? Any questions on any of this? I've thrown a lot at you so far. Okay, we got a little bit more to go, and then we're going to pack up because I'm going to have to finish this up next week. Sorry, guys, a lot more than I realized we had here. Okay. 2 more things here now that I've got them here. I'm going to come back to the Ezedokian. Let's do Ezedokian. We got here. We talked about. Oh no! Here we go. We got to back up. Okay, cathedra. Right, cathedra. So the cathedra. What does cathedra mean? It is the same thing, believe it or not, almost as throne. Throne is. It's Latin though. Cathedra means throne. So it's talking about the bishop's throne. So we have, or in Greek we would say, and here's where the Greek is translated right straight into modern English. The ancient word is the same, throne. It's just literally the same. It shows you how important that word is and how it's kept its memory and its usage even in the Greek. Okay, and even translated into the English, that powerful. Because why? What's the throne? What's important about the throne? Now, cathedra is a Latin term for throne. We don't use it that much, but we usually use throne because that's the English word, but it comes right from the Greek. But what does that make a reference for? That's this icon right here. You're right, the throne of specifically whose? Christ. That's the ever-ready throne. Christ seeking to come and return again to reign for us until then. The mantle that's on there, the red or purple mantle, is him to take up his reign as the emperors would do. He's greater than any emperor. And the closed book shows that it's the Gospels, inspired by the Holy Spirit, that is speaking to us now until Christ comes physically in the second coming with the angels to come and take up his throne. He came originally humbly in a stable, and his throne was a manger and literally a barn in a cave. All right, and yet he's going to come in glory, and so that's why the church takes what was an imperial throne, puts it in some of the earliest iconography that we have, that's in the big Constantinian churches, and says this is the ever-ready throne, that we're waiting for Christ to come and take up his rule for us. However, there's another physical component of that, and that is 2 things. Right behind, if you guys have a chance on the, how many, let's see, let me have you get up again, and I'm sorry, I'm moving around a little bit, but this is okay. Let's show and tell, all right? And this will cover a few other things we have here. So if you look here, and go ahead and get up on the ambulance so you can see it in, especially some that might be short, to be able to look in. I'm not looking at anyone specifically, but if there's some people that need to get in, stand up on the ambo, and you won't be struck dead if you do, okay? All right? So if you look behind the altar, we don't have a big altar space here. We had to work with what was given to us, and we're so thankful to God to have this place. But if you see what's behind the altar, between the altar and the very back, what is there in the very back? There's some chairs. There's chairs, clergy chairs. That's the synthronon. It means it's the whole space is for the thrones. It's the thrones with all the rest of the people. But the central one is different. Yeah, that is a gospel. That is a gospel. It's a closed gospel that's sitting on there. And so guess whose throne that's Jesus' throne. So no one sits on there except for who? The bishop. When the bishop comes, that gospel goes off puts on a holy table over here, and that's his chair to use. No one else uses that chair. Okay, because that's his. That's the ancient throne, both for Christ coming to reign over us, but also the bishop is his icon. He's the icon to us of Christ in that sense. And so that is his special throne. So every Orthodox church could be considered a cathedral in that sense, even though it's not called that, because it has a throne. And cathedra literally means where the throne is, if that makes any sense, right? Okay, so that makes it, that space between the altar, which is considered a throne, remember? Why is it considered a throne? The altar itself is considered a type of throne. Why?
Jesus is King and Lord.
Right, but what else is going on that altar? The gifts. The gifts. Our king sacrificed himself for us. We think of a king coming to rule and dominate. No, but he comes to lay down his life for us. That he would rule us by love and cause our hearts to be changed. Not because of a power from outside being forced upon us, but because of love transforming us on the inside. Causing us to want to follow him because he has first loved us. And we've experienced that love. Okay? And so that becomes a type of throne for him. And then the throne in the back, which is ever-ready throne. So the first throne is that of the altar, where he dies for us. The second throne where he comes in glory, all right, to reign over all, all right, and to judge and rule over all. And so that space in between that is what we call the high place. So that is a very, very special place. No one stands in that place except the bishop. So when we see at the liturgy, you see me in the liturgy tomorrow, Father Nathan's going to be off to this side. I'm going to be off to that side. And the other priest off to our side, and the deacons off to that side further. No one stands in the center of that, because that's for Christ alone, or the bishop when he's present. And he will use that. That's why we will move that. So that's a very, very important place. So when we pass and transit through that place, that's considered the high place, because it's in the Holy of Holies. You know, it would be like going between, I don't know, in the Jewish tabernacle, between the altar being like the Ark of the Covenant that was there, and then the back wall. So that's the high place in terms of for the presence of Christ. So we always make a reverence as we pass through there. Okay, and then this one here, this is a different one, even though this is also a throne as well too. This is a cathedra as well too. This one was the old original one. We use that if we have visiting clergy that are coming that can't be in the altar. Sometimes we have some of our non-Chalcedonian clergy who come to be with us, and we're not permitted to have them in the altar because we're not in full communion with them. Okay, so that's why they might be given that space to be able to be out here. That's part of the way we acknowledge them, that they are still priests, but we're not in communion. We're not in full communion. We recognize them as being priests, okay, which means we see them more as being schismatic, all right, and not necessarily heretic. I know that there's been some debate amongst some of the young adults about that, and you have to look at what our patriarchate has said, and other people have said that, but just how we treat them and how we work with them, how we receive them in, is a different status from them than anyone else coming in. But anyway, that's another story. But the thronee here, this is now the bishop's throne that he will use for presiding for when he's not serving from the outside. The thing is, this wasn't always here. This is a modern invention, okay? Because this hasn't existed in the Orthodox Church. We can date this when this came into use. Does anyone know? Yeah, 1453. Why 1453? Right, because that was the place where the emperor would come, and Hagia Sophia and other churches. His place would be out here, to be able to be out here during the liturgy. He had a special spot for the liturgy. When he was removed because of the fall of Constantinople, the end of the Byzantine Empire, this became the place for the Patriarch of Constantinople to be, because the Patriarch of Constantinople was told, you are now the head of the Christian millet, the Christian nation, and you will govern over them. You will take care of justice for them, and if you don't, and you'll keep them in line. And if you don't keep them in line and govern over them, then we'll come and remove you and place you with someone else. So this became the emperor's throne was then taken over, so to speak, by even though the bishop had his own, this was given to him to be able to rule because we didn't have an emperor anymore. Okay, so it's kind of the de facto imperial throne that was handed over that. And in fact, if you see from this icon here, there's even a couple of pieces of Byzantine dress that was given to the patriarchs and given to the bishops that were not theirs from before 1453. Can anyone point anything out there that might be theirs? The crown, right? That's the type of crown of the Byzantine crown that they have. Usually, you see the bishop wearing that with a cross on the top. In the Russian tradition, certain priests, archpriests that are given that honor. Father Ramon, some of you might remember Father Ramon, who come and serve with us from Our Lady of Kazan. He's one of the few, that's the mitred archpriest. There's no one else in Southern California that I know, and he was given that privilege to be able to have that, and so he wears a crown similar to that. But that is the kind of the Byzantine crown, which is their symbol of authority and rule. And so that was given to the bishops. The bishops need to be able to do that, and in each area they were responsible for during the Turkish yoke, during the Ottoman Empire, and during also, especially during the when the Ottoman Empire took over, that was given to them at that point. There's also something else here called the sakos, which you can't quite see. This sakos, this garment that was here, see, it's got a lot of jewels into it. Of course, Christ never wore anything like that. It's just not that he had, but what was put on Christ at his passion? Do you remember? He was given a crown. So this kind of represents the fact that the bishop has to don that in remembrance of Christ's crown, but also something else that was put on Christ. The purple robe. Purple robe. So he wasn't given a purple robe, but he was given the same kind of vestiture. It was called a sakos. And it wasn't a big, long thing. It actually was kind of short here, kind of heavy, richly embroidered, and then also a lot of it had a lot of sometimes pearls. You'll see it in some of the old icons and that, and some jewels that might be put into it. And so that sakos is what was given as a sign of the authority of the bishop. So if you see, the priest will have the phalonion on, right? So the bishop's vestments are identical to the priest, except they will have the sakos. They won't put on a phalonion, because that sakos would represent that authority that's given for them now to be responsible for the Christian community. Okay, so let's go ahead and have your seats, and then we're about ready to wrap up with this part of the presentation here. We're getting ready for Vespers in like a minute. Okay. Okay, and then, yes, I know. We got a lot of stuff to pick up too. Yeah, and we didn't get nearly to all the stuff. Okay, so, well, that's okay. I've got a lot of muscles I'm going to be employing some of you guys to help pack up and pick up. Okay, so, but we will finish this though next. I believe we're set to do this for next Saturday from 3 to 5. Hopefully we'll be able to finish up. So a couple of things I want to be able to show you. That when the bishop does come, there is something that's been given to him. That he serves with, and this is something the subdeacons and the deacons just have a difficult time with, and I'm just so glad I'm not a subdeacon and a deacon to have to deal with it. That's dikiri, Dixie is what some people like to call it, dikiri. It means di, meaning two in Greek, kiri, meaning candles. It literally means two candles. So the two candles, and what do you suppose this would represent? They bless with them, yes. I don't know how they do it, but they bless it, and they do it cross from one another. It's like, that's why I can never be, thank you, God, never can be a bishop, because I don't want to be a bishop, because I want to keep my wife. Thank you very much. But it's just, you have to do it in a way that's kind of difficult. But why the two candles? Right, the divine and human. And in some traditions, they actually have them bring them together and they entwine them together. The Russians really have that. It's really nice. I don't know how they do that. But the Russians seem to take everything and develop to a fine art. God bless them. And then this is the dikiri, the trikiri. This is the trikiri, which would mean, if that's the dikiri, this is the trikiri, which means three candles. Yeah, simple. And so he will use this one. This one he has in his right hand. That one he has in his left hand. And that's why they usually have special ribbons they tie onto that. It's an ornamentation to keep them in place so they won't fall. There's practical purpose to those. And this, of course, he ends up blessing the people with, in terms of showing the mystery of the Trinity, and also of the full humanity and the deity of Christ. We see that these were something that were developed by, we can see them in the primary sources by the 7th century. So that means in the 600s they started having those. Before then, we don't know. We can't find anything, so it might have been something that developed as a way of, after the fight over some of those heresies about the nature of Christ or the Trinity, to further underscore the Trinity and the full humanity and deity of Christ, that those would end up being used. They're only done, however, during a hierarchical liturgy. They're not used at any other time, okay? All right, and then with that, I think, any questions before we attempt to, we're going to wrap up here and we're going to get some of your help to put things away. And let's make sure we're set for next week. Yes, 3 to 5. And hopefully we're going to see if we can finish up by then. Okay, so let's stand, and then I'm going to employ some of your help to put some of, we need all of the Matins booklets back. We need all the Vespers booklets back. And I'm going to need to see, and the bulletins, unless you're going to be here tomorrow, but we need the bulletins back as well too, because we'll put them back there. And then also but you can keep the list of these terms. Please bring them for next week if you can. I'll have extras because I do have extras here. And then also we want the 2 Divine Liturgy books back, and we're going to have you help put those away. Let's pray. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, our God is one. Lord, we're thankful for this time. We're thankful for each one that are here. We are thankful for your simplicity to us as love, and yet we recognize the complexity and the mystery that is in our relationship with Thee. Help us, O God, in utilizing these things to be able to come to draw near Thee closer more and more as our true God, and to serve Thee in that love and humility. We ask this in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, so if I can get some of your help, please. Some who would want to be able to get all of the booklets back, but I do need some of the muscle people here to help pack up some of my books and that for me. Oh, the pencils. Let's put the pencils, if we can. Let's put them right here on this pew, and then we'll have those available for people afterwards.
Missing pages.
Okay, very good.
Since I won't be here.
Okay.